So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. This is our third and final presentation or seminar on the Meshrep seminar series. So today we're going to have Rachel Harris and Mukaddas kind of talk to us about Meshrep. So I'm going to give a quick bio about Rachel, and she can add to it. She's going to introduce herself after I give this introduction. So many of you might know, Rachel Harris is a professor of ethnomusicology and director of research at the SOAS School of Arts. So she conducts research on China and Central Asia, particularly on Uyghurs, and has conducted fieldwork in this area for about 20 years. And her current research interests focus on intangible cultural heritage, music and identity formation, soundscapes, and state projects of territorialization. And so, hard word there. If you have any questions during the seminar, you can type them in the chat box and we will answer them during the question and answer period, along with any new questions you may have. So without further ado, Rachel.
Well, thank you very much. It's really lovely to be hosted by the Tarim network. And I'm quite honoured to be following here as the last of this mini-series on Meshrep. So Mukaddas Mijit started us off with a big kind of overview of what Meshrep means in Uyghur society and all this kind of different variety of what is Meshrep, what are Meshrep. And last week we had Tarim, the Uyghur poet, who talked about his involvement in filming Meshrep. And that was a really fascinating session because that started to bring us towards the subject that I'm going to talk about today, which is the heritageization of Meshrep. I'm sorry, I'm using lots of irritating words there, but this transformation of Meshrep, as in things that people do within their communities, into heritage, that is things that, I don't know, you make look beautiful so that foreigners can admire them. That's my argument in a nutshell, right? So what I want to do, okay, so just to explain very briefly my understanding of Meshrep, and then I'm going to talk through my own experience with Meshrep. So that's going back to 2000, the year 2000 thereabouts, and the first kind of Meshrep that I encountered. And then I'll run through my whole kind of experience with UNESCO and serving as an examiner for the Chinese submission of Meshrep as an item of intangible cultural heritage. And then the whole kind of aftermath of that and how Meshrep got caught up in the current crisis in the Uyghur region. And then I want to turn to talking about our project, the current project we have going in Kazakhstan at the moment. And to talk about that then, I'll stop showing my PowerPoint and I'll bring in Mukaddas, who is our project filmmaker. And we can show you a couple of clips of the films that we've been making over the last summer. Now, of course, everything in Kazakhstan is extremely different this year. And we're quite stalled there as well. So, you know, our Meshrep project is very much a kind of sort of crisis management, and we limp from crisis to crisis here. But, you know, it's been very joyful, actually, when we have managed to get down to it. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of our videos and chatting with Mukaddas, and also chatting with you guys about what we've been doing, because some of you here know, I think, a lot more about Meshrep than I do. Okay, so let me see if I can share my screen and show you my PowerPoint. Okay, so Meshrep as Intangible Cultural Heritage is my talk, and I've already given you the background. Perhaps just to think a little bit more about what we mean when we talk about Meshrep. You know, I think it's good to start thinking about Meshrep as a kind of party. I think that gets us in the right kind of ballpark. But of course, there is more to Meshrep than just a simple party. You know, that would be an Ultrush in Uyghur, right? But a Meshrep is a bit more, it's something more formalized and more ritualized. And it has different forms in these different regions. So that is probably enough just to get us into that idea. Of course, last week, Tahir Hamid was talking about the filming of the Uyghur Meshrep, and they produced, I think it was 33 different videos, all of these different kind of regional Meshrep. So that gives you some sense of the variety. But of course, in reality, it's not so simple as, you know, one region has its own kind of Meshrep, but that does give a suggestion of the kind of variety. After I listened to Tahir Hamid, I just wanted to drop a very simple question into this meeting. What is the point of heritage? Or more specifically, what is the point of that grand UNESCO heritage system that was developed over so many decades? Really, you know, they started working on that convention in UNESCO in the 1980s, and it was finally brought in the late 90s. And as many of you, I'm sure, are very well aware, this idea of intangible cultural heritage became an absolutely huge phenomenon in China. And of course, it is still to this day. So a huge kind of social movement and massive government involvement with the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage Scheme. So that now it's safe to say that China is the major international partner with UNESCO in intangible cultural heritage. So what was it all about? Perhaps let's start with some of the problematics first. Again, this will be very familiar to some of you and not so much to others. So what are these issues that come up all the time when we're talking about intangible cultural heritage? And very often, this is not just in China, but all over the world, of course, we see things called intangible cultural heritage transformed into capital, monetized, that is, and then they become things which can be developed and marketed, especially, of course, to the tourist trade. We see these issues of culture bearers, that is, people who used to do these things that then become heritage, and they get kind of pushed aside. Oh, you know, the song and dance troupe looks so much more beautiful when they dance, so let's have them. Let's not have these kind of peasants showing their stuff to the foreigners. That's not what we want. This is all part of the problem of heritage becoming a spectacle, something for outsiders to look at. And I just thought it was so fascinating when I was listening to Tahir Hamid last week, and he was talking about filming the Uyghur Meshrep and that massive, you know, government-funded project that he was involved with. That was really one of the precursors to submitting China's bid to UNESCO for Meshreps to become a recognized item of intangible cultural heritage. And he talked exactly about those kind of issues. So this whole thing about what should we be filming? What would these foreigners, what do they want? What do they like to see? What do they think is beautiful? You know, and he talked about how some things might be embarrassing if foreigners saw them. How could they make it beautiful? So I thought that was really fascinating. And again, you know, this is not a unique issue with Uyghur heritage. You know, this is things that people talk about in this kind of transformation from things that people do into things that outsiders look at, which is what happens in that heritage process, right? Perhaps what is more clearly evident in China is this whole question, my last point here, of heritage management as a tool of governance. You know, how is heritage used as a way to manage people? And the Meshrep, of course, is a very kind of sharp and quite painful lesson in the ways that kind of thing can work. So, you know, all of that is very familiar in lots of contexts where heritage has been used by governments, but really that is very different from the whole kind of way that it was imagined by UNESCO. So what did UNESCO mean by intangible cultural heritage? You know, and you can go on the website yourselves if you don't have better things to do. You can read absolutely reams of this kind of ideology that they created over the decades about what intangible cultural heritage ought to be and how governments ought to engage. So they talk about this idea of habitual activities, you know, again, things that people do that structure the lives of the community. They can help transmit language and expressive culture. They reaffirm identity. They create those links with the past. And they play a role in promoting social justice, economic development and well-being. You know, this is all taken from the UNESCO language. And so this is something that I think really very often gets lost, certainly in the practice of heritage. When people come to start promoting heritage, this idea of intangible cultural heritage as belonging to a local community and really something that works within that local community to support their identity and the transmission of their culture. This is something that I really want to emphasize. And to do that, I would like to share with you my little bit of video on Facebook. Now then, let's see if I can do that. So I've stopped sharing my screen. Yeah, can you see my face? Hey, Tara. Good. So I've put a little bit of video on Facebook. This is a bit of video that I shot in my mother-in-law's village about 10 years ago. It's a classic kind of village Meshrep. If you go to chat and see that first thing that I've shared with you, maybe you can all click on that and listen in your own time. And I will also do that so I can remember how long it takes. Okay, so I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Okay, how are we doing? Are we back from that? I see we've been joined by a very impressive cat. Welcome. Right. Okay, so that link then, as I say, was something that we shot just a bit of home video at my mother-in-law's place in rural Aksu about 10 years ago. And it's a great example of you know, the local community, the village community, having a Meshrep, they're dancing, they're sustaining these kind of like customs, the local musicians are out there, they're pretty rough, you know, but they're wonderful musicians. But the thing is, that is not the kind of stuff that really made it onto those DVDs, right? That is not the kind of stuff that probably the makers of those DVDs would have regarded as sufficiently beautiful for foreigners. And so I just wanted to show that as that kind of, you know, contrast between things that people do and enjoy themselves and things that are okay to present to the outside world as our national heritage, you know. So let's get on to this question of the whole process of inscribing Meshrep on that list of intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding, right? I think it was in 2008, which was an easier time for the Uyghurs. And an American friend, a senior academic, called me up, and he said he'd had this email from UNESCO, and they wanted him to serve as assessor for something that he called maxi rap. What is this maxi rap thing, Rachel? He said. It sounds a bit like some kind of cling film or something that you use to wrap food with. I don't understand what it is. Please, can you deal with this for me? So that was how I came to be assessor for the Meshrep. Because when it was first, you know how it turned into maxi rap. You know, this is one of those awful stories about the transition between Chinese pinyin, or rather the transition from Uyghur real names to Chinese pinyin and then back into English. So a Meshrep, when you write it in Chinese characters, turns into a Maishi Lai Pu, I think. And then someone had translated that, Maishi Lai Pu, into a kind of English rendition, which had turned into Ma Shi Re Pu, or Maxi Rap, as my American friend had read it. So, yeah, anyway, that's a silly story about the problems of cultural translation. But so anyway, there I was, faced with this very large and lengthy submission from the state party to UNESCO to enshrine Meshrep as an item of intangible cultural heritage. And I was required to write a report saying, what did I think of Meshrep? Was it good enough to be intangible cultural heritage? And was China's plan, you know, acceptable? Was it a good plan to sustain and preserve Meshrep? So this was quite a difficult one for me. On the one hand, you know, it was a really great submission. You know, I mean, it was impressive, apart from the maxi rap. But you know, the original presentation that had been put together was obviously extremely well researched. It had been researched, in fact, by some of my Uyghur colleagues, among them Rahila Dawood from Xinjiang University, and Yasin Mukpul from the Heritage Center in Urumqi. Clearly, they understood very well what Meshrep was. And they talked about it in ways that really aligned very well with the UNESCO vision. So you can see here a little excerpt of what they wrote. Meshrep is an important stage. It's not just a stage, they said. It's also a court where the host mediates conflicts. You know, a very important part of that kind of community role of Meshrep. It's a classroom where people learn about their traditions. You know, all these have become terrible cliches now, but they remain important. So, you know, it was a great submission. On the other hand, it just fell at a very bad time, because by the time it came to me to cast judgment on the Meshrep, it was summer of 2009. And I just actually lived through the violence in Urumqi in July, the terrible interethnic violence which was caused when the police brutally cracked down on a peaceful demonstration. I'd witnessed the whole kind of aftermath of that, the mass arrests, the increased restrictions on community life all over the Uyghur region. And it seemed to me that in that situation, it was just not possible that the cultural organs of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region could possibly sustain any kind of meaningful grassroots Meshrep. And so that's what I wrote in my report. And I've got a couple of quotes from it here. Oh, sorry, I'm getting out of order. All right, so this is my report. Yeah, so this sense then that the restrictions and the increasingly tense political situation there would just not, it would not be feasible to enact the plan, to implement the plan that they proposed. You know, so for me, this kind of difference between representing Meshrep on stage and actually providing the conditions which enable people to have their own Meshrep has always been extremely important. And that really is because I started my field work in the Uyghur region in the mid-1990s. And that was already a time where Meshrep started to really divide into two. And you get this kind of separation between Meshrep that people are creating for themselves and are using to do important things for their community, and then this kind of state representation of Meshrep as song and dance, right? And so this then is another very sad story, going back further, the story of the Ili Meshrep in the 1990s. And it's a really very interesting one. You know, for anyone who thinks that Meshrep is song and dance, they should think very carefully about what was happening in Urulja, in the Ili region in the 1990s. So at that time, you know, there were a lot of people who were embracing or going back to Islam and becoming quite serious about their religion. And a group of guys then set up this Meshrep movement, which really was trying to do something very important in local society there. They were trying to counter what was really quite a serious drug and alcohol problem amongst the youth at that time. And they wanted to do that by, you know, getting people to pray, and also by things like, you know, organizing football matches. And unfortunately, this movement was something that the local authorities could not tolerate. And so the Meshrep movement was banned. There were arrests of the leaders. And this led up incrementally to some large-scale protests in 1997, which were very violently suppressed. This incident is still remembered today as the Urulja massacre. It was a very, you know, an early and very sharp reminder of how much the authorities in Xinjiang can actually tolerate community organization. And we saw at that time then, in the aftermath of the violence in 1997, these official statements that these community organized Meshrep, these were unhealthy Meshrep. And the state cultural bureau then started to organize what they called healthy Meshrep, which was lots of kind of singing and dancing and happy children smiling, you know. So already in the 1990s, we had this kind of tension and really sharp contradiction between things that people tried to do for their own communities and things that were promoted by the state. So let's fast forward then back to 2012, let's say. So we have then UNESCO completely ignored my report, right? It was inconvenient. Clearly, as I said at the beginning of this talk, you know, China is UNESCO's major partner, and they really didn't want to listen to my assessment of what would happen to grassroots practice, you know. So UNESCO accepted China's submission. The Meshrep was ratified as an item of intangible cultural heritage. And you know that it was great for a while. There was this huge outpouring of, you know, national pride, Uyghur national pride. And you could find Meshrep everywhere. On the national stage, you had, you know, Meshrep washing machines, you had Meshrep fancy restaurants, you even had Meshrep keep fit classes, and Dolan Meshrep, yes, serviettes, paper, and lots and lots of folkloric representation. So this wonderful gala performance in 2012 of Dolan Meshrep. I think I'll give you a chance to rest from my voice for a minute, and I'm going to stop sharing. And let's see if we can share another link. Okay, so I'm just going to share with you another Facebook video of that gala Meshrep. You've probably all seen this before. but it's lovely. So if you go to chat and look at that last link that I've just shared and click on that, then hopefully that should take you to my Facebook, and you will be able to enjoy Abdullah Abdurim before he shaved off his moustache. Good. Right, I'm just gonna stay here now and watch you doing that, see if it works. Okay, so that was just a short little clip, and I hope you've managed to enjoy that and come out. So, you know, that is just a little taste of the folkloric representation of Meshrep in the aftermath of its designation as Intangible Cultural Heritage by UNESCO. You know, I mean, I still love that. I have nothing against that Gala Dolan Meshrep, but I'm just wanting to drive home the contrast then between the village Meshrep and that extraordinary spectacle. Okay, so there we go. And you know, things in 2012, a lot of national pride in the Meshrep then at a difficult time. And so, you know, it's serving a purpose. But of course, as the situation in the Uyghur region became more tense into 2014 and 15, the Meshrep started to take on a different complexion. And at the point at which I really felt that this was really not okay, you know, and UNESCO should really be withdrawing its ratification of Meshrep, was at this point in 2015. By this time, of course, I was already not permitted to travel in the Xinjiang region. Indeed, I wasn't getting visas for China at all. So I only learned about this through online sources. And my husband actually found a blog by a local governor in Awat County, I think it was, who was talking with great pride about how they were organizing a weekly Meshrep to counter religious extremism. So this was really, you know, the early days of the People's War Against Terror, the start of the campaign to cleanse Uyghurs of the virus of Islam. And the methods that they were employing in 2014 and 15 involved a lot of compulsory singing and dancing. If you remember that period, this was before really the rollout of the incarceration, the mass program of incarceration, and the camps that were built in 2017. At this point, it was compulsory singing and dancing. So you can see there my picture of these villagers. The women have all been instructed to put on their most beautiful atlas dresses and their dopa, and there they are on Friday morning dancing in front of the local police station. Right. So this, of course, is about as far away from grassroots Meshrep and the whole kind of UNESCO vision of what intangible cultural heritage should be about that you can possibly imagine. Here we have, you know, the state directly instrumentalizing this heritage and using it to stop people doing what they wanted to do, right? So it was around 2017 then when I really began to feel quite desperate about this situation. I think probably the turning point was the arrest of my colleague Rahila Dawood, the professor at Xinjiang University, who'd actually edited a whole series of important books about Meshrep, which no doubt fed into the whole kind of submission to UNESCO. And she was sucked into the internment camps. And so as this situation developed then, and we sat outside observing what really started to look very much like a deliberate campaign of cultural erasure of the Uyghurs. So people like me, you know, scholars who'd worked for a long time with Uyghur culture started to think, you know, what can we possibly do in this situation? So, of course, one thing to do was to speak out, you know, to talk to the press. But the other thing that I started to work on was this project with the Uyghur diaspora in Kazakhstan. And so we submitted a grant application to the British Academy in the UK that and got some money from their Sustainable Development Fund. And this was really to work with the local communities, the Uyghur communities in Kazakhstan, who were themselves engaged in this kind of big Meshrep revival, and to really work with them and to watch the process of what was something completely different from what was going on across the border in China. So what we saw in Kazakhstan then was something that was really community-led. This was local people, this was local Uyghurs who grabbed this idea of Meshrep and were using it to really to strengthen the bonds of their communities, to strengthen local language and culture. Right. And so let me come out of my screen share there. Good. Mukaddas, how are we doing? I have a horrible feeling that I took slightly more than the 20 minutes I threatened there. Hey?
It's fine. It's fascinating. It's really great that you shared all this about Meshrep, and this maxi rap thing is really funny. And when you started talking about it, I thought it was a kind of internal word to say some kind of hot dossier for UNESCO, but it's fascinating. Yeah, it's really great. Thank you.
Cool. So I think I said at the beginning of our talk here that Mukaddas Mijit is one of our project partners on the Kazakhstan Uyghur Meshrep project. And she is our official filmmaker, although she's doing quite a lot more than that, I should say. So we both spent summer last year in Kazakhstan, and we traveled around different parts of the Uyghur regions, the Uyghur towns and villages in Kazakhstan, and we filmed a few local Meshrep. So you can find a lot of what we've done already on our project website. Did I share the link there? I should advertise ourselves, shouldn't I? That's meshrep.uk.
UK, yes.
Yes, you can, or you can search for Uyghur Meshrep project and it will come up. Mm-hmm. But I just want to change the pace of this this session now, and perhaps get Mukaddas to show you a couple of the clips of the films that she made, and then we can chat a bit about them and then open it up to a wider discussion. So okay. Mukaddas, what is the first clip you would like to share? Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, the first clip that I just put the link on the chat. During our fieldwork, we went to Yerkent. That's one of the city which is very close to Uyghur region's border, and there are historical links in between Hulja and Yerkent. Lots of this community, Uyghur community, who's still living there, is migrated from Uyghur region, although there's like a lot of back and forth in both sides of the border. So this clip is the mashup that we filmed in Yerkent with a group of musicians called Yerkent Bulbulları. So it's Ösek Nakşi, Ösek Sadasi, followed by Karvan Nakşi, or Karvan Nakşi followed by Ösek Nakşi. So
great. So go to chat, guys, and have a listen to that.
Olsa barchalardan hem Meshrep bilginin icaziyeti olsa ikinci bölümünü Üsek nakışı bilen içip aldık. Merhamet.
So, I mean, you know, it's very difficult to capture everything in a really short clip like that. But if you had just waited long enough to see the camera turn around, you know, you'd have seen everyone getting up and dancing to that instrumental clip there. And, you know, this kind of community dancing, I think, is just so important for that sense of like everyone being together. And, you know, in this area, they're all male gatherings, I should say. The Meshrep is an all male thing. So, I mean, there's some serious kind of male bonding going on there, I think.
Yeah.
Mukaddas, why did you want to show us that? What did you think was important about that?
The singing, the collective singing also is very important. There's a very short passage where the camera is on the people who's listening, actually, so they all know the lyrics and then they all participate. It's also like dancing all together, so it's a part of Meshrep. Is not just showing a music or showing a dance numur, as Tahir mentioned last time, but it's something that you get to experience and you get to participate actually also in the music and the dance. You have to feel it and then you have to be in it, and which is very important for a Meshrep. One of the bags of the Meshrep, they will I explained
the guy in charge.
The guy in charge, he will make sure that you pay attention to the music, and then you have this active listening of the music, and you have this active dancing, participating in the music. So it's not just, you're not passively just receiving information, but you're also giving yourself and then being there and experiencing all this artistic forms.
And you know, I mean, we had this great chat in Mukaddas about that particular song, actually, because she went, oh my God, you know, they're singing about the Telke Mountains. And, yes, you know, this was such an amazing thing about, you know, identity across borders, right? So there are these guys, and it's probably their parents, or even grandparents and great-grandparents who migrated to Kazakhstan, and yet they're singing about how amazing it is to walk through the Telke Mountains, right? Which is a place over the border that they've probably never been to, right? So I was like, oh, the Telke Mountains, where's that? And Mukaddas was like, oh, well, you know, everybody in Volga knows where it is, come on. And so I started looking on maps, and I could not find the Telke Mountains anywhere. I searched and searched for days, trying to find Telke Mountains on maps. And of course, you know, the Uyghur language names do not appear on the official maps. Mm-hmm. And so, again, my husband, Aziz, he started putting out, you know, calls on WhatsApp then for someone to show his stupid wife where Telke Mountains was. And we finally found this road sign, mm-hmm, which had above it in Chinese characters, Guozego. Mm-hmm. What's that, like Fruit Valley? And yes, then underneath in a little tiny Uyghur script, it said Telke Tar, the Telke Mountains. And so, you know, I mean, there's a great kind of story there about these memories just being lived and relived across the border when they are being kind of disappeared within the region, although not quite, obviously, because, you know, someone has slipped that name onto that sign. So that was fun.
Yes, the Telke Mountain is very vivid in the Volga music repertoire as well, and there's a lot of mention of it. And it is a very important historical passage because of the region rebellion in the 40s. So it's a very sacred place, which is really interesting as well. Is the other side of the border, they also have very beautiful mountains, and it's exactly the same continuity of these Telke Mountains, but they still sing about the other side and that place, which is really interesting, as you said.
Yeah, that's the thing. What else? Shall we play another clip?
So yeah, one of the important specificity of, I think, Meshrep is come together and have fun, right? That's what we what we saw in all these Meshreps and all these men gathered together, and I think their main goal is to laugh really hard and to have fun, make jokes. And the court section of Meshrep is specially designed for this kind of collective laughing, collective making fun, or but saying this is for the judgment of bad behavior. Or so I will share one clip from Almaty Meshrep. They're punishing a man who was always late or who left the previous Meshreps earlier without coming back. So this is how they punished him. Sorry, there's no subtitles, but we can tell you after what they're saying. Or should we share now?
Oh, yeah. If you put the thing up, and I'll talk about
Okay.
what it is. Yeah. So this thing about the community court is really so important. You know, it's a chance when everyone has to stand up and go, I think he's guilty because, you know, and they make these very formal speeches. They say, Bigum Bashlik, like this, my lord, you know, he's guilty because I saw him being guilty, you know. And then when they've like agreed that a guy is guilty and he's done this bad thing, whatever it is, then they all agree on a punishment. So this particular punishment is a very traditional and very comical kind of humiliation of the guy who's done something wrong. And it's called eating manta. And there's this whole kind of like questionnaire where when they ask him, you know, where did you go? I went to the restaurant, and what did you eat? And then you'll see them like slapping a big, what's a manta? Sorry, a manta is a dumpling. So it's like eating dumplings. This is the punishment called eating dumplings. Enjoy.
Siz Bishkek'ten ağinam geldi de özünüz ağinınızla bile Bishkek gitmişti de anıldık. Rас mı şu?
Ya bizning uyda o'tadik. Shu bir qo'yni akal to'gidek bir yo'g'on bir qo'yni.
Siz burun özünüz Bishkek'e bağlanmı?
Ya bu yer pat berib turamiz.
Ha, Bishkek'te Alamedin bazası kırdınız mı?
Ha, kirdik.
Alamedin bazasida aşkandı buldunuz mu?
Ha, bo'ldi.
Aşkanның mantılığı qandaq ke? Yo'g'onligi.
Yo'g'onligi mana shu. Kichiklarim bor, mening beshimdagim bor.
Beshingizdagi mantlarni siz puflab turib qanday yedingiz? Bir ko'rsatib beqinglar. Alamedin bazasından chiqib Bishkekda Osh bazasiga beribsiz. Osh bazadagi tavuzlar qanchalik?
Hamda Çek.
Kichik mi? Shu tavuzlarni
Ya demi yo'q bir baba.
shu tavuzlarni qana so'ydingiz?
Ha, yemedi bana.
So'ymidingizmi?
Yemedim, demi yo'q ki ona.
Qana tildingiz deyaptimi?
To'g'rab evet.
Bu yerdan chiqib siz Issiqko'lga beribsiz. Issiqko'lda dam yeyibsiz. Shu Issiqko'lda qandaq üzdünüz?
Hemisi gördük o çöktükten tas kaldık.
Sizning suv cho'kib ketdi dedi, qanday cho'kdingiz? Bu yerdan chiqib siz Prijval chiqib beribsiz. Bu yerdagi ashlang pullarni ajoyib deydi. Ashlang pullarni yeyib sizning qo'shingiz ko'p ketdi. Shu qo'shingiz qanchalik ko'p tushunib ko'rsating ha. Shu qo'shingiz ko'p keldi, shu qo'shingiz ko'p kelganini qanday chiqardingiz?
I've watched that clip so many times and I'm still laughing at it, you know. It's very nicely done. Why is it that Mukaddas, why do you think he goes like Bismillah Rahman Rahim? It's like a bit of an invasion of personal space, is it? So
Yeah,
make it formal before he like grabs him.
yes. It's they're making it like, because they're starting a whole series of punishment, so it should start with formal
All right.
religious. Yeah. I think there are some questions. Is there any significance in the way they are seated with interlocking hands, or is this just so? Do you see the question in the chat?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is about, so you see, like, the guy kneeling behind is controlling the guy in the front who's been punished. So I can't quite demonstrate, but so he's holding his arms behind him, and then the other guy has got his arm, like, the guy in the middle's got his arms through the other guy's under his armpits. So when that happens, it's guy number 2, like, humiliating him, and it goes on, doesn't it? I can't remember. There's watermelon.
Yeah, it's very long. Yeah. Grapes, a lot of it goes on for 10 minutes.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the way the pantomime works. Yeah, and the guy can't get away, and he has to submit, and if you can't submit to that kind of game, and if you don't like being made a fool of, then you can't stay in the Meshrep, So I mean, it's quite a powerful bonding kind of thing, and there is so much of that. And also this question of laughter that Mukaddas was mentioning. I mean, it's so striking, the noise these men make when they're laughing. I'm a bit embarrassed to like imitate it myself, but I mean, it's like, no, I'm a girly. I can't do it. I can't do it hard enough. But I mean, it's extraordinary, powerful noise. And when you get 30 men all kind of like bellowing away like that.
And also so the facial expression that yeah.
So my music students, you must feel that I've kind of strayed a long way away from music at this point, but that is exactly my point. And it feels quite strange for me as an ethnomusicologist that I now spend a lot of my time complaining about how there are things that are more important than song and dance. And if you take the song and dance out of the community, then you've made it into something very different.
Yeah, song and dance is it's in the same level as the laughter, being together. I would also say that the food is very important in Meshrep. So all these people, they come together. There's someone who will make food, and they will share a meal together. I think it's the same thing. Like, everything should be shared during this time and this place, and that's the sense of community coming together and sharing dance, music, laughter, and food, and good news, bad news.
There's a comment there from Ainur saying that Rahila Dawood's book documented 179 different kinds of pantomimes, plays. No, I mean that. People are very creative. There's all sorts of different ones. I think it's time to open up the discussion a bit. We've been going for an hour, and we can probably keep going for a little bit more, depending on how you guys are to chat. So, Ainur, would you like to say something? Would you like to comment? While you think about that, would anyone else like to ask a question or make a comment? You can do it in the chat, or you can unmic yourself and speak.
Before that, I just want to add, you can also go on YouTube to check different kinds of, or all the other videos that we put together, all the clips, and then there's also some Meshreps that you can see. It's not the whole Meshrep because we had to edit it. Sometimes it was 3 hours or 4 hours, but we eventually edited it down to, we try to edit it down to 1 hour maximum, but you can see some different version of Meshreps that we filmed last year in Kazakhstan. Yeah, there will be more coming in the near future as well.
Hi, can I ask a question, please? I should have raised my hand or something. There should have been. Anyway, thank you very much for the presentation. I was going to ask, because I had heard that Meshrep kind of is an opportunity for the men, i.e. the heads of the households in the communities, to kind of get together, well, obviously to party and everything, but also to kind of discuss sort of community issues. Probably because I missed the previous two sessions, you probably had mentioned it, but I was just wondering, to what extent is that relevant now to Kazakhstan, to the communities that you have been conducting your field work in? And also another small question about the food: who cooks the food? do their wives cook the food, or like mom, or like the men cook the food themselves? Because that would be quite interesting to see the sort of gender division context. Thank you very much.
Mukaddas, do you want to take either of those?
Yeah, I will just for the food. I had different experience for the food, but in Kazakhstan they have a dedicated title. One man is responsible for the food, so he will have some help and he will prepare the food, and it's very formal, and if the food is not good, he will get punished. So that's very serious. But in other places, for example in Yarkent, it was the family who hosted the Meshrep who prepared the food. There was children, there was like not children, but there was men, women, and sometimes some kids could help to prepare. So it was not someone who was especially,
look, we're getting a couple of questions about gender, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is a very important thing, right? So in some parts of the Uyghur region, Meshrep are mixed. They're not segregated, although they're probably usually like the women and the men will sit separately, but, you know, men and women get up and dance, you know, and yes, it's quite mixed. But in this particular tradition of Meshrep, the Ili tradition that they continue in Kazakhstan, this is really a very strongly men-only situation. And so I mean that has a lot of kind of reverberations, like the way they laugh. You know, they would never laugh like that in front of the ladies now, and they wouldn't make those kind of jokes that they do either. Oh my gosh, had a bit of trouble about whether to include those on the video and put them online, right? So, you know, we started this project, you know, just wanting to think about Meshrep and how they were doing it differently in Kazakhstan, but we quite quickly got quite uncomfortable with, you know, ignoring all the women in Kazakhstan who were also doing quite important things. And actually there's a very important parallel system in Kazakhstan called chai, you know, as in we sit down and we drink tea, you know, and in so many ways it's an exact equivalent to Meshrep. You know, there's important things that happen there. They preserve customs. They sit down and they talk serious community business in chai in the same way that they do in Meshrep, right? Yes, fascinating. Zumra, you are saying in the chat exactly what I'm saying, exactly what's coming out of my mouth. I think they're really equivalent, these chai and Meshrep. And they're both about, you know, organizing, about getting things done, about talking about serious issues in the community. You know, so they sit down and they say, you know, so-and-so needs some money. Can we raise some funds to help this family? Or, you know, are we going to support this or that? It really is about community organization. And that, again, you know, looping back to Gulja, to Ili in the 1990s, is why these Meshrep are very often problematic. You know, and even today in Kazakhstan, you can see that they're pretty careful about what they do. You know, they emphasize about language and customs, Urpadet. But actually, our project partner, Arblek Kamalov, a professor in Kazakhstan, he did this amazing, like, historical study of Meshrep, and he went right back to the like the Russian imperial rule in that area, and he found these documents, these Russian documents of the imperial bureaucracy going, there are these very dangerous things called Meshrep, and we need to suppress them because they are, you know, they're probably promoting foreign influence in our territory. I mean, God, you know, the way that they were talking about it back in the 19th century was so similar to the kind of language you get from the Chinese government in the 1990s. You know, it's like, and then in the Soviet era as well, you know, the Soviet government, they start trying to kind of co-opt these things, and then they realize, you know, it's just too powerful, these community networks, and so they suppress them as well. So, I mean, I think the Meshrep, you know, as well as having some great, you know, fun and song and dance, it is really a lot about the problems that indigenous people, that minority people face when they try to organize themselves.
May I make a few comments?
Please.
I teach global dance history at George Washington University, and I also have a dance company, Silk Road Dance Company. And there's so many parallels. When we study indigenous cultures, there's always this tension between the pure form, the untouched form, and then what sometimes gets called airport art. You know, it's beautiful for the tourists, gets watered down, the costumes change, think of the Hawaiian dancers, you know, in the 50s, what happened with them. But then something interesting happens. And some cultures, they reclaim their heritage. It's a way of defying, whether it's imperialism or colonialism or whatever outside forces trying to say, you're like this. They go, no, we're like this. You see it with Native Americans, with powwow. You see it with the Hawaiians, they reclaimed with their Merry Monarch Festival, where they decide the rules and the competition and how things should be done and how they should learn the Hawaiian language. So there's always a tension. As someone who could rightly be accused of cultural appropriation, although I have been enabled strongly by the Uzbeks, that sometimes those performative versions are a way to get outsiders interested in the culture, because they don't know the language, they don't know the traditions, they really don't understand what's going on with the humor, some of the things. Just as the Russians thought that the Meshrep was scary, just think of what happened with the ghost dance in the US in the 1800s. Led to the Wounded Knee massacre. The outsiders don't understand, and sometimes they see something dangerous or frightening. So a beautiful performative version can open up people's hearts, and then they can walk through the door and learn more about the culture. So I don't think it's either an or, but I think that you've got to always nourish the roots, but it could be both, or many variations on a scale of from the beginning purest form to something that's I hate to say commercialized. I think you've got to walk a dangerous tightrope there, but something that can be understood by people who are not of the culture of origin.
Laura, thank you for that. You know, I think that there's definitely value in that kind of approach. You know, I'm not personally an authenticist, you know. I mean, the problem with this case, of course, is that all that we're left with at the moment is the song and dance in the Uyghur region at the moment. And that's why I emphasize the value of the community so strongly, because that has been so thoroughly lost. But yeah, you know, I mean, I'm not a diehard, you know, opposer of folklorization.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Sorry. I think the artists, they have been trying to create, like, express themselves using all this traditional elements, and then present something different to the world. But in this case, I'm not either a very strong folklorist, or I don't want to have, like, defend this authentic culture. I don't know what is authentic culture is. It's a big debate for me. But but in the case of Meshrep, it is something a little bit different than just showing a form of art on stage, or not showing it. It's the whole essence of sharing this kind, like it's, I don't know how to put my language around this, but it's this experience of sharing it differently than the Western way of watching a show or participating in a performance is lost. I think it's two different things that we're talking about. It's not, the Meshrep is exactly not in Western way of watching a performance. It's something like involved everyone. So that is taken away from Uyghur community.
Great. I think Rahima had a question there.
Oh.
Hi, yeah, not a question. Good to see you all. I just want to share, because I grew up in a family, and it was 4 elder brothers, and until 1980s we were in a village, and I experienced the Meshrep very much, especially my second brother and my third brother. They had whole winter every year. They had this group, their own age group. They had a Meshrep, and each of them have to host. So also to answer Iskandar's question, it was a feast that made by women. My mother, my sisters were very, very busy each time when they had to host the Meshrep. And the length of it is quite long, actually. Normally, for example, in winter, they would gather around like 5 o'clock, and then won't finish until like 10 in the year, or sometime even earlier than that. And they would take over the Dalan Sarai, the two rooms, big space, and we all had to wait until they finished. And we could only watch from the window what they were doing. Sometimes we were allowed to go in because we were young, little, but it's a male dominated. It was very, very interesting. So to me, because I grew up in that environment, I witnessed and all that. So it is a kind of very much people want to do something fun to get through the winter, and also it's an opportunity for community, for friends to come together. And so they take very seriously as well. I remember my brothers would like rehearse before the Meshrep. When they have Meshrep, they would play the music so often to get ready for that Meshrep. So I think it's another good thing about Meshrep is also for the local musicians, there is a place where they perform regularly. And so, when you have to do something, then you take it quite seriously. And that's, I think, this is my opinion, maybe part of the reason that in Roja music is so important, and even the musicians who are not like professional musicians, they are really, really serious. So that's just my just share my own experience.
Yeah, that's great, Rahima. Thank you very much. And there are some amazing videos on YouTube now of those kind of classic 1980s Meshrep they were having in Roja with people like Nur Mehmet, Tursun, playing tambour. They're just such a pleasure to listen to. Yeah. Hey, there's quite a long intervention from Esadullah Uyghur, which perhaps we should respond to. Yeah, of course. So, yes, of course, the border is still closed, right, between Kazakhstan and the Uyghur homeland, and was indeed well before the COVID-19 lockdown. So Esadullah is asking if we see Kazakhstan as a place where Uyghur culture can be saved and revived. And are people trying to do that in Kazakhstan? Yeah, you know, I mean, I really felt, Mukaddas, you can chip in a minute as well. I'd like to know what you think. But I really felt, you know, just how, I mean, it's wonderful what goes on in Kazakhstan. You know, these are wonderful communities, but compared to the riches of the cultural riches that, you know, I've experienced in the Veten, in the Uyghur homeland, you know, it is quite limited. And, you know, people, their language and their cultural understanding has really been very strongly dissipated over the past decades. You know, so the Uyghurs in Kazakhstan, they are very strongly focused on strengthening their communities and reviving their language and their culture. And yes, clearly that responds to their understanding of what is happening in the homeland. I've heard people say that, you know, why are these guys having fun and singing and dancing, you know, when people in the Veten are suffering? You know, I've heard that kind of thing. Personally, I think that singing and dancing and laughing and having fun is doing quite important work here. You know, I mean, I don't think that the Kazakhstan Uyghurs are going to save the whole of Uyghur culture, but it's important that they do this, because I think this is a really great mechanism for reviving and sustaining what they have there at the moment. It's difficult for them to speak out, you know. Things in Kazakhstan are also quite, what's the word? Sensitive,
yeah.
Right? So, you know, I'm impressed by what they've managed to do within also quite difficult situation here.
Yes, and I agree with all you said, but one of the difficulty, I think, for the, like, thinking Kazakhstan will be the next Uyghur homeland, that they will safeguard all the Uyghur culture, is not that easy to think about, because Uyghur culture is so diverse. The Uyghur culture in the Uyghur homeland is so diverse, and it's so different from one city or one region to another. And what they only can do is perpetuate what their grandfathers bring to Kazakhstan with them. So yeah, so I think they're doing all they can to continue this culture, but I don't think we can say they will save all the Uyghur culture. That's my feeling.
Yeah. And there's another question there from June, who wants to know if modernization had an influence on traditional community life and Meshrep. I don't know. I mean, modernization is that kind of word that's always written into the submissions to UNESCO. This
Exactly.
heritage is under threat from modernization, and you know, we need to save it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't honestly think that was the major threat to Meshrep. Meshrep, you know, was something that was evolving constantly if it was allowed to.
Yeah, and also if you look at the Ili Meshrep in the 90s, they were all young boys are participating in this Meshrep. So it was not just something that old people used to do, but it was like young men, young guys. They were very interested, very keen on coming together and doing these Meshreps. So it's not, I don't believe that the modernization participated in demolishing of Meshreps, but quite the contrary. Like, I think people, if they were allowed to, they would have host Meshreps in beautiful restaurants that they have in all the places in Uyghur homeland, and would do like nice Meshreps
Are there any more comments or questions? I know. Would you have anything to say? Or who else do we have? Oh, Myra. Iskender has a question about how young do you have to be in a Meshrep? Mukaddas.
Yeah, I think you have to be old enough to understand all the dirty jokes, I think. But you have to be, I think there's a rite de passage. There will be an initiation. You should be brought by your father or your uncle. So you shouldn't be a kid, but adults, 18. I don't know exactly the age limit, but you should be old enough to understand the jokes and also to not get angry when people joke on you. So to bear all the jokes on you.
It's all about learning to be a man.
Yeah.
Right, it's a rite of passage, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in I think in the south of Uyghur homeland, it's different because the Meshreps that I have been in Turpan or in Dolan area, there were kids also running around, and it was open to everyone. There was not that strict rules in the south.
If it's open to the women, then the kids come too, and the babies, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think really, you guys need to do a whole nother series about chai. You know, I mean, I think they deserve it. You know, I think it's a thing, isn't it, that the Meshrep became the thing that got the heritage gong. You know, whereas chai, which women do, you know, it just doesn't have that kind of kudos, you know, it doesn't have that kind of level of, oh, this is our heritage. But you could. Perhaps we should put in an application for chai to be turned into heritage and, you know, sustained.
There's an idea.
Oh, there's a question from Ainur. Tell us a bit more about what you saw as Ili Meshrep and Dolan Meshrep. Do you mean what differences you saw? Yes, good.
Yeah, it's quite different. It's quite different because for Ili Meshrep, they're only male participants, so women are not allowed. Like they won't say you shouldn't come, but it's a common knowledge, so women will not participate in Meshreps, and they have very strict rules, and it's taught and learned by the Meshrep Otuzogul community, and I think one of the very biggest differences is in Ili Meshrep there are dance, but it's not as much danced as in the south in Dolan Meshrep, because in Dolan Meshrep the whole Meshrep is really rhythmed by the dance with the mukam, and everyone gets to dance. It's like a really dancing party. That's a huge difference, I think, in between Ili Meshrep and Dolan Meshrep. And Ili Meshrep,
sorry, I have seen the court though at the Dolan Meshrep.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. They have court. Yeah, they have in Ili Meshrep and in the Dolan Meshrep, they both have courts, and the punishments, some reasons to be punished are similar sometimes, or sometimes are different. But in Ili Meshrep, the chak part is very colorful and very strong. They make jokes, and it's improvised poetic jokes as well. But in Dolan Mukam, they don't have that much chak, but they will have some jokes, they will have some improvised poetry, but the chak culture is very strong in Ili Meshrep, and that's, yeah, I think that there's quite some differences there.
There's a question here from Rohan about UNESCO. And do they keep track of the items that they've approved? And the answer is very much no. You know, there is no system to kind of check on how it's going with the state party. and the way that it's managing the Meshrep or the items of heritage, I think the state party has to submit a report. But that's it, you know, and there's never been any kind of intervention. There's never been any kind of withdrawing of the favour. You know, I spoke to the current head of the Intangible Cultural Heritage scheme last year and complained at him quite a lot, you know, and said, what can you do? And he said, well, you know, you don't really want us to take this away from the Uyghurs, right? Do you? You want us to say, Meshrep and Mukam are now no longer on the UNESCO list? I mean, that's not going to be good either, is it, Rachel? And that shut me up, really. I mean, what I would really like UNESCO to do is, you know, write some fairly strong letters and say, can you explain how in the current political situation you can possibly be implementing the plan that you promised, dear state party? And, you know, I think that would be a valuable and useful thing, but that hasn't yet been forthcoming. You know, there's been various moves to try and get petitions going to UNESCO. I'm still waiting.
Yeah, I think UNESCO, they're so dependent on what they call it, the commission of members, party members or something. Like they have like different countries are members for the board, so they all decide things all together. I was very shocked because I went to some of their conventions, their big gatherings, and then each item gets to vote by these members of this committee. And sometimes some practices that they're presenting is really contrary of the UNESCO's convention, but because of all these board members from different countries, they all liked the person who's presenting. For example, if China is presenting a kind of ethnic folkloric park, they will support that and then pass it, because even if it's contrary of the UNESCO's
well, it's like
convention.
The Eurovision Song Contest, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, completely. It's all about diplomacy.
Yes. Yeah, and what happened after Meshrep became Intangible Cultural Heritage, I think it's even after 12 Mukams became cultural heritage, they created a kind of very strange, bizarre centers to promote 12 Mukams and Meshreps. But by doing that, they musified, I don't know how we can, like they put all these practices in museum. Actually, they were all livid practices, but they put everything in museums so people get to watch it more conveniently.
There's a good suggestion about publishing the spontaneous poetry. I mean, again, you might have these issues of, you know, how acceptable would people find that in print? You know, I mean, we had a lot of issues with just publishing our films of the Meshrep, because people had made all these very kind of risque jokes. And then when they realized, I mean, and they knew we were filming, you know, and then when we sent them, because we were very responsible and sent all of our films, you know, to like the Meshrep leader to check that, you know, he was comfortable with it, and they weren't. Mm. And, you know, we had this great back and forward conversation, and really they were quite keen that we would reduce our film to a presentation of numere, you know, of episodes of song and dance. And so we had to have this long kind of negotiation about, you know, how we thought it was really important that these kind of sensitive negotiations and slightly risque jokes should be in there, because that's all part of what's important about them. That was quite an interesting conversation. We're good now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another question.
The relationship with Meshrep and Mukam. Oh, blimey, I know. That's a big one. Yeah. You know, that's a whole book. I know. I mean, what the mukam as a repertoire, you quite often find mukam played in the context of Meshrep. So I mean, if you're just thinking about mukam as a musical repertoire, then so it's inside the Meshrep. But then mukam is also a repertoire which is taken from other traditional contexts, so it's not a simple relationship. I mean, you know very well, of course, about the relationship between the mukam and the sections of the mukam called Meshrep, which have come from the Sufi gatherings. So that is a very beautiful and complex and kind of circular relationship. And then you have to start thinking about, what does Meshrep mean, and how did that word come into Uyghur culture? I can't begin to chat about that one now. I mean, you've read Nathan Light's book, and you've written about this yourself, my love. So everyone else, I recommend you to. Well, if it's English language, it's probably Nathan Light's book. I think that's still a really great book. Which talks a lot about that relationship. Thank you. Oh God, what's the name of the book? Nathan Light's something about heritage, isn't it?
Yeah. I have it here.
Intimate heritage. What a great title. Thank you. There, you were thinking of that even before I mentioned it. Yeah, of course, that is very difficult to get hold of under lockdown. I do have a PDF. Probably Nathan would share it.
I think there's a PDF, even on his website or something. I think it's easily to find it. Yeah.
Looks like everybody here has read it, just about. Good. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we will take one last question or comment.
Or maybe not.
Maybe not.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourselves and say anything you want.
And thank you very much for joining us, and also thank you very much for Tarim Network for providing this opportunity to talk. I mean, in 3 sessions, it was a long and very consistent and a lot of talking about Meshreps. I hope people who join us for 3 talks learn something about Meshreps, and eventually we will put all the videos from this 3 seminar online soon on Tarim Network's website or YouTube channel.
Yeah, we're hoping to make these into videos that we could probably share around with people that couldn't join us today, and that'd be very, very helpful. Just educating people on more on Uyghur culture.
Thank you so much for organising this then. I think this Tarim network is doing really great work, so keep it up, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, this was such a great series by Mukaddas Mijit, and we had Taharka, who was such a great speaker, and now we have Rachel Harris, and it was just great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much for organising this. And for
thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Yes, we will, when we make this series available online, we'll send out a link and you guys will be able to see it.
So what is next? Are you doing anything? Any other thing coming up you want to advertise?
I'm not sure. That we are talking with quite a few people, but I don't think there's anything like cemented yet. So just check on Facebook, Instagram. There should be event links coming up soon.
Okay, great.
And I want to thank Zef as well. I think he's here or he's not.
Oh yeah, I don't think he's here today.
I don't know. Tarim, there's a Tarim. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll thank him on WhatsApp then.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'll pass it to him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, guys, thank you for joining us today. It was such a great talk.
Okay. See you
Thanks.
soon.
Thank you. See
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Great. I'm off.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Bye-bye.
Bye.